I'm Alan Nunley, the Vice Chair of the committee, and Mr. Simpson is required to be in two places at this moment, so he asked me to go ahead and gavel the committee in, and then he will be here as quickly as he can get here. So I want to welcome our witness, Dr. Pat Dehmer, the Acting Director of the Department of Energy's Office of Science. Dr. Dehmer, this morning the subcommittee heard from the Department's applied energy programs. One of the challenges they continually face from the committee and from Congress is to justify how their programs are able to support this nation's energy sector without displacing or duplicating work the private sector is or should be doing. It's a question that has no easy answer, but we need to be mindful of staying on the right side of that line. The challenge you'll be facing this afternoon is not an entirely different one. To explain to this subcommittee, populated as it is with non-scientists like me, why investing in your programs is good use of our taxpayer dollars. Your program has, of course, generally received broad bipartisan support. However, as budgets continue to be constrained, you and your colleagues will have to work even harder to find ways to illustrate the importance of your programs as they compete with others for funding. This challenge is made even harder because it seems as if the very nature of scientific investment has changed over the last couple of decades. Cutting-edge science is even more reliant than ever before on multi-billion-dollar facilities that few, if any, countries are willing to fully support alone. That means that investing in the biggest scientific questions of our day relies at least partly on multinational teams. At the same time, it's difficult to justify spending billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars on international efforts abroad while our constituents here at home need jobs and support. Yet even our domestic facilities, many of which are among the best in the world, face an uncertain future. Realistically, your out-year budgets are more likely flat, if not declining. We've been telling you this for years, yet your budgets are increasingly consumed by operating your existing machines and constructing new ones. I hope we'll hear today what you feel to be the correct balance between facility operations and investments on one hand, and on the other hand, investing in the highly trained workforce needed to preserve our country's position, leading the international scientific community. Dr. Dehmer, please ensure that the hearing record questions for the record and any supporting information requested by this subcommittee are delivered in final form to us no later than 4 weeks from the time you receive them. Members who have additional questions for the record will have until the close of business tomorrow to provide them to the subcommittee office. With that, we'll ask Ranking Member Kaptur for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and welcome, Dr. Dehmer. It's really a pleasure to have you with us today. And the Secretary of Energy, Dr. Moniz, has repeatedly stated his belief in an all-of-the-above strategy for our country that promotes production of domestic energy, creates jobs and opportunities for American families, and addresses the serious issues imposed by climate change. I believe that much of the inspiration to overcome these challenges must come from your Office of Science. Last week there was an interesting New York Times article that I will ask unanimous consent to insert in the record entitled "Billionaires with Big Ideas Are Privatizing American Science." And I admire the motivation to give back to society, and we can certainly all use the help in this time of budget austerity. However, I'm concerned that this trend points to the fact that the United States government is failing in an area critical for future economic growth, and that is high science. Innovation is one of the last frontiers where the United States has and continues to clearly lead. We cannot become complacent, believing that these philanthropic-minded citizens are able or will continue to fund the nation's needs, or even will figure out the most important arenas in the national interest. Moreover, innovation outside the public sphere threatens our ability to ensure the work of our best and brightest leads to domestic growth and manufacturing in America's interest, not just in some subset of us. Recognizing the budgets that are the current reality, the Department must approach its science portfolio with even more rigor than before, and we know you are. There is evidence of such an effort in this administration's request. and I hope today you will help the committee understand the trade-offs we are making in the name of scarcity. Our leadership in many areas of science and technology depends in part on the continued availability of the most advanced scientific facilities for our researchers, and as we discussed last year, many of the department's infrastructure plans were developed with a far more optimistic funding profile than current reality will support. Now that you've had several years to reorient your program, I hope today you will take time to discuss both the hard choices made by this budget request and those challenges yet to come under a flat budget scenario. I want to touch briefly on the national labs, which are rightly viewed as a national treasure. However, coming from an area without a national lab, as most members do, I continue to wrestle with how the labs can play a transformational role for organizations beyond their boundaries and help jumpstart sectors of our economy that so desperately need their technology, beginning with American manufacturing. I look forward to your insights. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this time, and we look forward to the testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Dehmer, Ms. Dehmer, not Mr. We're looking forward to your testimony.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Capter, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to come before you today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2015 budget request for the Office of Science. I first want to thank you all and everyone on the committee for your continued support for the Office of Science, and especially for your support in the 2014 omnibus. In formulating our budget this year, our decisions were based on several considerations. The first priority is the pursuit of leadership in areas judged to be critical for the U.S. and for the Department of Energy's mission. At the top of this list is high-performance computing. The Office of Science is on a path to deliver a capable exascale machine by early in the next decade. We expect that in the coming decades, computational modeling and simulation will play an integral and essential role in all facets of science and engineering. We cannot cede the discoveries afforded by high-performance computing to others, and indeed, other countries are now aggressively pursuing exascale computing using indigenous components. Today, modeling and simulation already have enabled us to examine subatomic phenomena such as the quark-gluon plasma at the relativistic heavy ion collider, to develop new materials such as superconductors, and to understand the workings of proteins, the perfect and still largely inscrutable biomolecular machines that power life. In the world of engineering and manufacturing, today's leadership computing facilities at Argonne and Oak Ridge National Laboratories have modeled neutron transport in reactor cores to predict the behavior of nuclear fuels, have conducted combustion simulations to increase fuel efficiency in vehicles, have made U.S. airplane engines quieter, more fuel efficient, and less polluting, and have simulated ice formation in water drops to reduce the wind turbine downtime in cold climates. The next generations of computers promise even greater understanding and predictivity, permitting engineering design with confidence and without prototyping, permitting materials design without an experimental laboratory, and permitting the understanding of complex coupled phenomena. So what do I mean by that? That sounds pretty techy. For example, can we predict the flocking patterns of birds knowing only how a single bird flies? This is a trivial example of perhaps one of the greatest challenges we will put to computers, that of understanding complexity, how the behavior of a system derives from its parts. The U.S. needs to be the first to benefit from the next generation of computers. Our second priority includes selected increases for research and for instrument and facility construction. Even in constrained budgets, we must move forward with new things, and we are willing to do so. The fiscal year 2015 request includes a new activity in the Basic Energy Sciences program for the development of computer modeling in material sciences. Though a leader in the development of many, if not most, scientific modeling codes, U.S. researchers still rely on materials modeling codes developed outside the United States. Our researchers must pay to use the codes. They do not have access to the source code, and the codes do not run very well, very efficiently, on machines with multiple processors, like our leadership computing facilities. This is completely unacceptable in a field as important to innovation as materials design. The 2015 request also includes increases for ongoing major construction projects, such as the Linac Coherent Light Source and the Facility for Rare Isotope Beams. It includes increases for detector upgrades at the Large Hadron Collider and for new buildings or infrastructure upgrades at 4 of our laboratories. Our third priority is the optimal operation of our scientific user facilities, which together serve 28,000 users annually. Again, we give priority to those facilities that align with areas judged most critical. Facilities that are operated at 100% optimal are the Leadership Computing Facilities and NERSC, and the Basic Energy Sciences X-ray Light Sources, Neutron Scattering Facilities, and Nanoscale Science Research Centers, which together support materials design, development, and characterization. Finally, our fourth priority is maintaining a balance between research and facilities. Overall, 40% of our budget is invested in the support of researchers in academia and in the DOE laboratories. This percentage has been steady for many years, and we commit to continuing this. Finally, our budget was informed by considerable external advice. Our choices were informed by important advice from the federal advisory committees and also by the year-long activity to prioritize existing and proposed scientific user facilities. This activity also involved all 6 of our federal advisory committees. In the near future, indeed 2 months from now at the end of May, we are looking forward to receiving input on the strategic plan for the High Energy Physics program from the High Energy Physics Advisory Panel. In formulating this budget, we did indeed make hard decisions. Overall, we are confident that the budget will advance science, will provide 21st century tools and facilities for our research communities, and will maintain U.S. leadership in key areas important to U.S. competitiveness. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Doctor, could you, just out of curiosity, tell me what an exascale machine is?
An exascale machine is a machine that runs at 10 to the 18th operations per second. And so let's see if we can tell you what 10 to the 18th is.
That's a lot.
Okay, it's a lot, yeah. So you know what a million is, and you know what a billion is, because you deal with those dollar amounts, right?
We even deal with trillions.
That's just where I was going. You know what a trillion is because you deal with deficits. So the next one up is 1,000 up from that, and that's a quadrillion. That's petascale, and we have petascale computers now. And 1,000 up from that is quintillion, and that's exascale. So it's a million up from the dollar amounts you're used to dealing with.
That's way a bunch.
That's a bunch. Right.
That's pretty fast machines, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And the world is in a race to make those.
What are the, just out of curiosity, what are the advantages, disadvantages if we do or don't do that?
Oh,
What does that give us the capability to do that we can't do now?
Yeah, I think I tried to touch on that in the opening statement. It gives us a predictability to look at real-world systems and to model and simulate them without having to prototype them. So, for example, if you are trying to create an engine, if you're Ford Motor Company or GM and you're trying to create an engine, in principle, you will be able to start prototyping these, what they call in silico, using a computer, without having to make prototypes. You will be able to understand parts of the world that are inaccessible to you because they're too dangerous, they're too far away, so forth. So the faster computers get, the closer you can get to simulating the real world without approximations. And that is the power of these computers, and that's why the world is in a race to approach exascale.
That's fascinating. Kind of blows your mind. The Office of Science is one of our bill's top priorities. It obviously drives American innovation, keeps our science and engineering workforce competitive, and leads to tomorrow's jobs in manufacturing and other sectors. In the department, the Office of Science supports remarkable research, and there are great opportunities that you've mentioned that are out there, but we also face a stark fiscal reality. This year's request proposes to reprioritize funding within the science portfolio by cutting the fusion and high-energy physics programs in favor of basic energy sciences and nuclear physics. In these times of fiscal austerity, can you walk us through the difficult trade-offs these programs face in the coming years?
Sure.
Because I don't see our budget getting any better for the next while, frankly.
Right. The decrease in high-energy physics was driven by a couple of factors. One, some of the construction projects were rolling off, and so funding decreased. Second, we are not going forward with major new starts, and the major new start under discussion is the long baseline neutrino experiment, until we hear the priorities put forward by the high-energy physics advisory panel. So that is a decision on major increases in the high-energy physics program is essentially delayed until we get that advice. In fusion energy sciences, we want to keep a vigorous domestic program. This year, we had a cut in the ITER construction in response to what is happening in the ITER organization. The administration absolutely maintains its commitment to the joint implementing agreement that was put in place approximately 2006. But realistically, we believe that our request this year will provide the ITER project with what it needs this year.
And we, in fusion energy, we cut the ITER by 50 million, and domestic fusion energy research by, what, 40 million?
It's less than that, I believe. I'd have to look up the numbers. I don't have them in.
I thought overall it was about 90 million cut in that. But nevertheless, the fiscal year 2012 bill directed the Department's energy programs to transition away from awarding multi-year grants that mortgage future years' appropriations unless absolutely necessary. As in the case for large construction projects that we simply cannot fund in one fiscal year, we find tremendous value in fully funding projects up front, particularly small grants, so that we can more adeptly handle the fiscal environment in which we find ourselves in any given year. I'm happy to report that the bulk of the Department's energy programs made this transition quickly, and now these programs are in a position to react more quickly to changes in funding and market conditions. The Office of Science, however, was never as nimble on this subject. Of the 43 multi-year awards made by the Department's energy programs in the first 2 months of this fiscal year, 41 were made by the Office of Science, or 95% of them. And to clarify, these were not large projects. The average total science award was only $952,000. This has been consistent with your office's previous practices. As a result, last year's omnibus appropriations bill included a requirement to fully fund awards and grants less than $1 million. And can you provide us with an update on how that transition to fully fund projects of under $1 million is going?
We're absolutely following the direction to the letter.
Okay. Ms. Capter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and thank you for your testimony, Doctor. I was just going over the last page of your testimony where you talk about science laboratories infrastructure, and you talk about funding requested for 2015 to complete construction of science and user support building at the SLAC National Accelerator Facility. Where is that located?
California.
California.
Yeah.
And then it talks about infrastructure at Princeton, New Jersey, and completing design studies for materials design at Argonne, an existing laboratory, and then photosciences lab, again at SLAC, and an integrative genomics building at LBNL.
Yes, that's Berkeley Lab also.
That's also at Berkeley. I just wanted to step back for a second and say to you in your position, you know, if you were to overlay the nation and various academic institutions and how we disperse federal funds for research. I remember when I was first elected many years ago, and we didn't even have the phone connected on the 6th floor of Longworth. And the first visitor in the office was from MIT, the MIT lobbyist. And I actually studied at MIT, so I appreciate it, but they didn't even know that. They were just there to lobby a freshman. And I thought, my gosh, my university people don't even know what my office number is yet for Mountain, Ohio. And I guess my request to you is, as I visit these various laboratories and I look at the infrastructure and the fine minds that are working there, and then I look at the parts of the country that have been economically hurting for a long time, all I would ask you to do is find a way to find the universities in places that aren't the favored few here in Washington, and to do some affirmative effort to find what's there, and to see whether it's engineering, whether it's math, whether there are ways that, with all the duties you have, that you could really look at parts of the country that have major challenges. And not all professors in those regions are inadequate. Many are there for various reasons, and they have something to contribute. But I found, for instance, when I was on the National Science Foundation Committee, it was the same universities all the time, and I just look at the flow of funds over, 25 years, and I think, okay, it's great for the country, but it's not so great for many other regions of the country. So if there's anything you could do to broaden the umbrella, we're not even asking for buildings, we're just asking for inclusion. And to particularly look at those places in the country that have had serious outwashes of production and where the people are still struggling to obtain work. The role of these incredible institutions can really make a difference. And we've had really made some good efforts in our area to sign an agreement with Argonne, for example, with a NASA facility, which is the only federal research facility we have in northern Ohio. But I just look around the country, and I think, it's a good life. Working at Berkeley, man, you look out over the Pacific, and fog comes in, and sun comes up, and places for lunch, and it's comfortable, and, everybody's got an IQ above, 120, 150, 2,000 probably. And I just look at the places in the country. Our chairman of the full committee comes from Kentucky. I look at some of the struggles that he has in Kentucky, and I think in the high sciences, they ought to at least be surveying the horizon and taking jewels that exist in different parts of the country, including them. I remember when I was on one of the veterans subcommittees, and I said, you got a problem with all these veterans who are sick in the beds every day in these hospitals, and let's take a look at who is on your protocols, which scientists are coming in to make decisions about where to give grants for this or that within the VA. It was the same thing. So I see a federal pattern across different departments, and I'm just trying to sensitize you to my concern that there be inclusion and that somebody be thinking about that somewhere in your shop, and at least provide opportunities to include people on peer review panels, places that the Department of Labor can tell you exactly where these communities are and their whole regions that lack the kind of capacity that many of these facilities that you have mentioned in your testimony have. So I just wanted to make that point. And in terms of the, I just want to go to my questions here. I wanted to ask you a question about other countries. And when you talk about everybody wanting to get into certain types of high science, in the way you look at the world, how would you rank those countries and in which areas of inquiry?
Okay, let me back up a little bit. When I started in science, it was a very long time ago, it was probably 40 years ago, the United States was the place to be. The United States has not diminished at all. We still have outstanding researchers who are well funded. The change has been that other countries, other areas of the world, recognize that science and engineering are incredibly important for their economic development. So now I would say that, for example, in high-performance computing, big competitors are in China. China actually has the #1 top-performing computer right now, in Japan, and in Europe. In light sources are incredibly important because they can examine materials at the atomic level. And if you know how materials are made at the atomic level, you can start building new ones. We were dominant. The United States was dominant in light sources for decades, and I know because I used some of the early ones in the early days of light sources in the 80s. Today, China, Japan, Europe, South America are all building light sources that are competitive with ours. It's not that we aren't well-funded and building outstanding machines and having outstanding people work. It's that the rest of the world has figured out that they have to do this too. And so we are in a race in the important technological areas that drive innovation with other parts of the world.
Where's Russia?
Russia is not at the same level in computing. It's not at the same level in materials characterization using these very advanced tools, but they have some outstanding researchers, and they have outstanding facilities for particle physics and high-energy physics. Novosibirsk is one that comes to mind.
You've talked about material science, and we know that that's critical for the advancement of our nation's manufacturing base. Can you take a few moments to delve a bit more into what the Office of Science is doing in the area of material science?
We have one of the biggest material science programs, basic research material science programs in the government. And I think taken as a whole, the Department of Energy is probably the lead in material sciences if you include the technology offices. What we have done over the past decade is we have worked very hard to understand how materials are constructed from the bottom up. Using nanoscale science, we built 5 nanoscale science research centers in the mid-2000s, and what we are doing now is trying to develop new materials with new properties and new functionality that can actually be put into production for things like batteries and solar cells and catalysts and so forth. So we're one of the leads in material sciences, and we're very aggressive about pursuing new ways of doing business.
Does that include metals as well as composites?
Absolutely. Metals, alloys, composites, soft materials, everything.
All right, that's my first round, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nunley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this is the second time today that the ranking member and my questions are so much along the same line that I think we must be working off the same notes. To be honest, I think while I do consider her a friend and a respected member of this committee, I think it's more indicative of the bipartisan nature of the work on this committee, because the issues that we're confronting really don't know partisan boundaries. In my opinion, we're standing on the shoulders today of giants. There are people who came before us that made the decision to invest in research, and those who actually conducted that research. And almost every aspect of every one of our daily lives has been impacted by the work they did before we got here. I'm thinking I have friends who work every day in careers that did not exist. In fact, there was not even terminology for these careers when my grandparents were my age. And with that foundation, I look forward knowing that my children, my grandchildren, and their grandchildren are going to be impacted every day in their life by decisions that we make collectively on this committee, by projects that we either embrace or projects that we reject. And so that's a heavy responsibility. With that in mind, following on what the ranking member had to say, I'd just like you to continue to put in context our nation's investment in research as compared to that investment being done by other global powers. Where do we fit?
Perhaps an example. Some years ago, when I was still the director of the Basic Energy Sciences program, we made the decision to invest in the LINAC coherent light source, which is an X-ray free electron laser. It was throwing long. No one believed that an X-ray free electron laser would work, but we used the SLAC LINAC. And turns out that the day of commissioning, many people said it will never work. It will take 6 months to commission. It commissioned in 2 hours. But that's not the real point of the story. The real point of the story is that Germany was also heavily invested in free electron lasers. And one of the things that we did was have collaborations with our German colleagues, and they had very advanced instrumentation and detectors. And had it not been for their bringing their instrumentation and detectors over, we never would have made such a huge impact on day one of the commissioning of the Linear Coherent Light Source. If you go back, say, 20 years, we never could have said that story. There never would have been a Germany that was equal to us and in competition with us at that level. That's becoming more and more true. And I think it's necessary to pick areas of science where the United States wants to be number one and make aggressive investments.
Gentlemen, yield for just a second.
Sure.
What does that mean? I mean, not the last statement, but the light source that you're talking about. I mean, in practical terms, to the American
Okay.
people, the average individual, what the heck's all that mean?
So what do light sources do? Okay, they examine materials at very high resolution through scattering, through something called scattering, and they can tell you the atomic composition and the placement of atoms in materials. For example, biomolecules, right? Biomolecules are very, very important, and drug manufacturers are very keen to know the structure of proteins because they can then make drugs that bind to the proteins, right? So the linear coherent light source is different than conventional light sources. Conventional light sources need tiny crystals in order to do X-ray scattering and get structures of proteins. The linear coherent light source actually is so bright and so powerful that you can drop a protein, not in a crystal, but you can drop a protein in a little jet of water down in front of the beam, and without a crystal, one molecule at a time, you can begin to get structures. Now, why is that important? Why is it important to do that fast? It's important to do that fast because many, many proteins, the majority of proteins, won't crystallize. So now you suddenly have a tool that does single molecule imaging. That was one of the stretch goals of this machine. Single molecule imaging of proteins that don't crystallize. And so it opens up a whole new world of science for the users.
All right. You talked about collaboration with other countries, and so much of what we do does require that collaboration.
Right.
How do we achieve that and at the same time maintain our country's global position of scientific leadership and our own national interest?
Well, there are cases where collaboration is necessary and is good, where an instrument is too expensive, too technologically difficult for a single country to build. And the one that comes to mind is the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. We are essentially out of the business in the United States of collider physics, high energy collider physics, but it's perfectly acceptable to us and to the rest of the world to be users at CERN. In fact, a third of the users at the Large Hadron Collider are U.S. So, okay. But do you want to do that? Do you want to have a central facility in the world that does high-performance computing with you not having access to it or control of it? As far as I'm concerned, I don't think so, and that's reflected in our budget. Do you want to have facilities for materials characterization, which drives new materials discovery and development, that's somewhere other than here? I really don't think so. So there are places where you collaborate, and there are places where you have to have your own tools. That's how I look at it.
Mr. Chairman, 4 semesters of calculus got me out of the engineering school and into the business school, but this fascinates me.
I agree with the gentleman. This is fascinating stuff, and fortunately or unfortunately, one of the two is way above my pay level. It's up there, but it is interesting, and that's why I ask on the practical thing, how do I explain some of this stuff to the average Joe that wonders why we invest in this stuff, you know? So I appreciate your answers. Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for welcoming me to the committee. Doctor, I have some particular concerns I'd like to ask you. I assume in nuclear experiments that chaos is not a good thing. And yet I have delved a little bit into this ITER facility, the international organization that runs this ITER facility, and it appears to be pretty chaotic. And I think that that is affirmed by the budget request, which is lower for fusion energy sciences. And then one particular sentence that you have in your testimony, it says, our present assessment of the international project is that it cannot, under current conditions, meet the most recent schedule put forward by the ITER organization. Is this a waste of money?
No, that's not our position. As I said at the beginning, the United States, the administration, maintains its commitment to the agreements that we made in 2006, the Joint Implementing Agreement. I've built a lot of projects in my years in the Department of Energy. I spent 12 years as the Director of Basic Energy Sciences, building very large projects, the Spallation Neutron Source and several others. And I know that projects run into trouble. And the Management Assessor's report on ITER has indicated that ITER is now in one of those periods. What we expect is for the ITER organization to accept the recommendations of the Management Assessor's report, to create a corrective action plan, and to begin to implement that corrective action plan. And at that point, I think it's possible for this project to turn around and build ITER. But at this point, the $150 million request is what we believe is an appropriate request for this project at this moment in time.
I'm sorry if I'm confused about the number. I'm reading 225 million.
No, that was
This year's implemented number.
in 2014.
Yes,
In 2014, the number is $200 million.
and it will drop to 150.
Correct.
Okay, I guess the point then is affirmed that here we are lowering our commitment because we're basically suggesting that the organization's organizational structure and the trajectory towards some outcome here appears less and less probable. Is this money better invested elsewhere? Should this be revisited? This is a lot of money.
This is a lot of money. I think this year, under these circumstances, $150 million is the correct request.
Okay, we're putting a Band-Aid over something that's bleeding, and then
No.
next year we'll have another consideration as to whether or not we're going to be a part of this at all. And when is the projected project conclusion? 2024? Did I read that correctly in another article?
I don't know what article you're referring to, but the ITER organization has committed to provide a baseline, which is the schedule for the project by summer of next year, by summer of 2015. I don't particularly want to preclude obviate their work by suggesting what an end date might be for first plasma.
Okay, then that's when it gets hard for decision makers, because we're committed to something that appears to be open-ended, is not going well at the moment. There is no defined outcome. I recognize this is experimental in nature and it's got international ramifications. When did this start, and when were the initial assessments that we would actually have some conclusive data or project that was usable, implementable? Because it was a lot earlier than this.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
When did the organization start, and when were the initial
ITER organization-
timelines and projections for
The ITER organization
outcomes?
Became an organization in 2007. And
But the idea was much earlier than this.
Oh, yes,
And
yes.
and I assume money spent on it much earlier than this.
the United States rejoined the ITER organization at that time. We had been in it much earlier.
And then suspended our membership? And why did we do that?
I think, I'm not a historian in this particular case, but I believe because the design and schedule.
So we're bumping maybe perhaps into the same problem here.
I think it's a very different project at this moment in time than it was at the time we got it.
What is it going to produce and when?
It's going to produce ITER, which is the first worldwide experiment to create a burning plasma, and probably the earliest my personal guess, not an administration guess, is late 2023. But again, the ITER organization has committed to provide us with a baseline by summer of next year.
Do we have some sort of probability assessment of what a 2023 outcome is going to look like? And then how much money will we project to have spent by then on this?
So last year, when we submitted the 2014 budget, we said that we would spend up to $225 million a year, up to $2.4 billion, but we would reassess as we approach first plasma.
Who are the largest contributors to this?
The EU is the largest contributor.
And how much do they contribute?
They have 45% of the project, and the other members have 9.09% each.
So we contribute 9% to the total.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask you, when these large international joint ventures, I guess you'll call them, whether it's the accelerator at CERN or ITER or something like that, are there proprietary, the people that do the research there, is it shared with all the members and that type of thing?
No, at CERN, the work is not proprietary. The expectation is that the researchers will publish their work.
And will that be the same at ITER?
I would have to go back and look at the ITER agreement. I don't know the answer to that.
Is it generally the standard that we use on these types of
Yeah,
facilities?
correct.
And if it's proprietary work, they end up having to pay for it?
Yes.
Okay.
For virtually all of our scientific user facilities, there is no cost for non-proprietary work, and the expectation is that the researchers will publish their work. A very small fraction, a few percent of the work is proprietary, and then the user pays full cost recovery.
Okay. Several years ago, the Department of Energy transitioned all isotope production programs to the Office of Science, transition that was ordered by Congress a number of years prior to that. In your view, is the isotope programs operating well under the Office of Science, and is the Office of Science working to ensure that commercial isotope producers have direct working relationships with user facilities on a day-to-day operational matter as it continues its effort to coordinate isotope production activities across the DOE complex?
Yes, we think it's working well. There is an isotope office at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and that is the day-to-day contact for most people who would interact with the program, but others do interact directly with headquarters.
The office authorized to charge its customers fees to recover its costs on the isotope program, and I am told that it also imposes an additional surcharge on all or most customers, which the office says is to pay for infrastructure across all isotope facilities. Do you believe the pricing, including the surcharges, is well justified and fair to both the taxpayer and the isotope customer?
I'm not familiar with the surcharge. I will have to provide an answer for the record on that.
Okay. And I apologize, Mr. Fleshman. You came back in, and I was thinking we were going right down the line, and time is yours.
Well, thank you. Well, I appreciate the line of questioning from the chairman, and I thank you for this opportunity. And, Doctor, the sentiments of this subcommittee, I think, are very clear. We're truly amazed with what's going on in your field. I have the great privilege of representing the city of Oak Ridge. Anytime I go to the lab and see Dr. Mason, I'm just amazed with the tremendous strides that we're making across the board in science. It is so important. I have a few questions, though. The spallation neutron source and HIFER at Oak Ridge National Laboratory make Oak Ridge the world leader when it comes to neutron science, neutron scattering materials for study, and the production of isotopes and irradiated materials with neutrons. Does the budget request adequately support a continued infrastructure, continued infrastructure needs of the neutron facilities at Oak Ridge?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. Do you foresee an increased role for the neutron facilities at Oak Ridge, especially in light of the closure of the Lujan Center at Los Alamos?
Yes, the budget that we've provided for high-flux isotope reactor and the spallation neutron source will allow them to accommodate a couple hundred more users, and that's roughly the number of users that will be displaced at the Lujan Center.
Okay. Doctor, as you're no doubt aware, the Oak Ridge National Lab is required to maintain an increased security footprint due to the presence of U-233, a fissile material, in Building 3019. Although the removal of U-233 from the Building 3019 is primarily the responsibility of the environmental management, security is the responsibility of the Office of Science. How much does the Office of Science expect to spend to keep Building 3019 secure until the materials are removed?
I will have to get that answer for you.
Okay. If you provide that for us, I'd appreciate that. A follow-up to that. I know there have been some issues with the removal of U-233 to the Nevada test site. Can you tell the committee about some of the issues encountered and provide us with an updated timeline, please?
I know that the Department of Energy is working with the state of Nevada to try and reconcile this. I don't know what the timeline is for an outcome of that.
Okay. We discussed earlier, and I appreciate your going into some of the supercomputing issues, which are tremendous. I wanted to talk with you about that. As you're no doubt aware, Titan at Oak Ridge was the fastest computer in the world until recently being eclipsed by a Chinese computer. Could you please tell us what the department's plan is in order to remain a world leader in supercomputing?
Well, I talked a little bit in the oral statement about exascale.
Yep.
We have a plan to produce an exascale machine by the early 2020s that will be 500 to 1,000 times more powerful than the ones we have today. Moreover, it will be a capable exascale machine is the wording that we use, and what that means is it will be programmable and it will be usable by the scientific communities. That's a big difference between building an exascale machine that just runs at exaflops per second. So our goal is to make an exascale machine that is programmable, that has reasonable power requirements, and that is made from commercial components. And we have 2 or 3 generations of computers that will be installed at Oak Ridge in the intervening years before we get to, say, 2022, 2023. So we are aggressively going forward with that. It is our highest priority in the Office of Science to make that happen.
Thank you very much. I think you and I agree that supercomputing is a super priority for our nation, and I appreciate your passion for that. If I may, in my last question, again, you've touched on it earlier. Can you please tell the committee and reemphasize just how important this is with supercomputing to enhance and improve other programs within the Office of Science?
One of the things that our Advanced Scientific Computing Research Program does is it reaches out to all of the programs in the Office of Science on a regular basis, has joint workshops to find out what those programs need in terms of capability, hardware capability, and also works with every one of the programs in the Office of Science to advance their scientific computing needs. In addition, that program has reached out to the technology offices that you talked with this morning and is working with them as well.
Thank you, Dr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I guess the reason people like Mr. Nunley and I find this also fascinating is you're sitting here talking about these supercomputers. I can still remember when I was taking college chemistry and physics classes when I bought my first HP computer that added, subtracted, multiplied, divided. And the thing is you'd use it taking a test and you didn't trust it. So you'd do it with pencil, you know? And that's what's so stunning to us when we see all this stuff. I know it, but I should have said this earlier. And welcome, Mr. Fortenberry, to our subcommittee. It's good to have you on the subcommittee. The congressman from Nebraska, 1st District, and we're glad you're with us here. So, Ms. Kaptur?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to, Dr. Dahmer, go to the area of bioenergy a little bit. And the department is currently supporting 3 bioenergy research centers, and they're in their second 5-year term. My question really is, can you bring us up to date on the progress in those 3 centers? Where are they located? And what breakthroughs have you accomplished during that time? And how do you work with the Department of Agriculture? I can assure you that I was on the Agriculture Subcommittee, and Senator Harkin and I wrote the first title to push the Department of Agriculture into energy, and they didn't want to go there. We did it in an appropriation bill because the authorizer. So it's really interesting to see where the momentum is. Now some have discovered that, oh gosh, there is a future in unlocking the carbohydrate molecule, but my sense is we're at the beginning of that science. So this morning I put an article in the record dealing with an F-16 unit in our region that flew, the first one using a blend of canola and other petrol blends, and it didn't crash. But I'm interested in what can you tell us about those 3 centers? Where are they located? Where are you headed with all that? What are some of the breakthroughs you've noted, and how do you work with the Department of Agriculture?
Okay, so first, the centers are located at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. They have multiple partners. Each center has a number of partners, but the lead institution for the first one is Oak Ridge National Laboratory. For the second one is the University of Wisconsin, and for the third one is Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And each, like I said, each one of these has...
The third one was Lawrence?
Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory.
Okay.
Each one of these has probably 10 or 15 partners. Universities, local industries, whatever. The Bioenergy Research Centers were established in 2007, and they were established to produce ethanol from cellulose. At the time, cellulosic ethanol was a stretch. Most ethanol was produced from crops, food crops, that assembled the raw material into a part of the plant that was easily obtained. Corn, for example, corn kernels, or soybeans. Cellulosic ethanol is very different because the feedstock, cellulose, is entwined inside the woody stems of the plant, and it's hard to get out. It's not a food crop, so it doesn't compete with food crops. So there were 3 challenges for the Bioenergy Research Centers when they were started. One is to look at feedstocks, alternate plants. The second was what we call recalcitrance, and that is the process of getting the cellulose out of the plant. The plant doesn't want to give up the cellulose. The plants have woody stalks that are very stiff, and Mother Nature made them that way so they wouldn't fall down. And now we're trying to get the cellulose out of those woody plants. And the third challenge was microbial synthesis of biofuels. Mostly ethanol, but it could have been it could be higher alcohols or fuels as well. So each center picked certain areas to emphasize. In a sense, all of the centers touch on each one of these, but in the area of feedstocks, there has been a tremendous effort to look at wild-type feedstocks. For example, looking at thousands of poplar varieties, looking at all kinds of grasses. So just looking at what Mother Nature gives us, but second, doing genetic engineering to make those plants have more cellulose and make the plants release their cellulose easier. So that's the first, feedstocks. The second is recalcitrance. So how do we get the cellulose out of a woody plant? And there were pre-treatment innovations made. There was microbial decomposition of plants to get the cellulose out. So in each one of these 3 areas, there's been major advances made. And the final is microbial synthesis of fuels. And a couple of the bioenergy research centers have worked very hard to modify microbes to make fuels in a single step or make heavier fuels. So I think the first 5 years of these bioenergy research centers have been incredibly successful in addressing the three main goals of the BRCs, the bioenergy research centers, when they were formed. Now they're into their second 5-year period with even more ambitious goals, but again, along these same three areas.
But cellulosic has undergirded, it's your fundamental material, from what you're
Yes.
saying. So you focused on the alcohol side. What about the oil side?
So the bioenergy research centers have also worked on modifying plants to produce oils so that the oils would be easier to extract. But in general, their goal was not to make plants that have oil that could be immediately chemically altered to be alcohols.
And is that because that's more expensive?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that the fundamental goal of these centers was to use non-food crops that could be grown in weaker soils, so that they wouldn't compete with the soils that we use for food crops, and make it modify the plants, modify the microbes, modify pre-treatment conditions to make it easier to pull the cellulose out of the plants, and then to modify that, to make sugars, and then to ferment the sugars to make
It'd be
alcohol.
really interesting to look at the sugar versus the oil. I don't know if you can find somebody there who thinks about that.
I can certainly have a little short white paper, page or two white paper written on using oils versus using sugars to produce alcohols versus using cellulose.
I have a listing in my office one of my seed dealers gave me with all the oil content of seeds. And some of them are not really edible seeds, but they produce a lot of oil.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just curious for our biodiesel market, for example, how much research is going on there. I'm trying to get a sense of what's happening on the sugar side and what's happening on the oil side. So any clarification you can
Okay.
provide would be most interesting.
Okay.
Okay, and I wanted to ask a question I asked this morning of our witnesses from the department, and that is, of everything you've seen in developing research, for the record, are there any particular fields that when you've seen what's happening, it's been particularly rewarding for you as a scientist to say, that is really going to mature quickly and it's going to make a huge difference? It sounds like supercomputing is where you put a lot of your marbles, but maybe there's something else.
So I think when I look back on my time in the Department of Energy, one of the things I'm proudest of is 5 years of workshops with community input and advice from the advisory committee that eventually led to 46 Energy Frontier Research Centers. They are just little engines of discovery. We recently had the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board, CEAB, look at the Bioenergy Research Centers, the Energy Frontier Research Centers, the hubs, and the report, the draft report was just posted on the web, and the Energy Frontier Research Centers have fared extremely well. So I'm very proud of that. In terms of my later years here, I think one of the biggest surprises to come out of the research that's done in the Department of Energy was the Nobel Prize to Saul Perlmutter a few years back for his discovery of the accelerating universe. It's rare in science that a single discovery or a single event changes the way we think about the world around us, and this discovery of the accelerating universe did that. So that's a key point. The third thing that I'd like to mention has to do with our light sources. Every 3 years, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry is awarded to biochemistry. And the last 4 prizes in this area were awarded to investigators who use the light sources to learn the protein structures of extremely important proteins. And I think it's remarkable that we haven't missed a Nobel Prize using a light source in 4 of those, in a set of 4 of those. So I think, these are the kinds of things that I think of when I think about what's really changed the way people think.
The perspective is very, most interesting. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nunley?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you and I both, Mr. Chairman, have been reflecting on our university career, so it's got me. If you would, just walk me through the relationship between the Office of Science, the various research universities, we've got 4 in my state, and the national labs. How do you integrate them? How do they fit together, and what are their roles? What are your roles? What is your role?
Okay. So in the Office of Science, we support about 300 institutions, and because there's only 17 labs, most of those institutions are universities. Increasingly, over the last several years, the laboratories and the universities have partnered in big activities. The Bioenergy Research Centers is one. All 3 of them have university partners, and 2 of them are run by labs but have significant university partners. Of the nanoscale science research centers, 3/4 of them are hosted by universities, and they will reach out to labs and have lab partners. So what I've seen happen is, over the last 10 years, that the university community and the laboratory community have become much more interactive, much more collaborative. The labs have been more collaborative with one another, and the university community has relied on the laboratories for its big tools. 25, 30 years ago, so I go back with the labs a long ways, there was no such thing as a scientific user facility that was wide open. Today, the scientific user facilities have redefined what a laboratory is. We touch as many people by funding them directly as we do by those going to our scientific user facilities at the labs, roughly 28 to 30,000 each. So the labs and the universities have really become partners, each doing what it does best and each needing the other.
So how do you go about deciding we need this university to partner with this lab as opposed to that university?
Typically it's done by a funding opportunity announcement, and the partnering is self-partnering.
So there's an announcement, the universities know about it, and then they just work.
Typically, groups at universities and laboratories will reach out to one another to
Okay.
form a partnership. It's not directed by headquarters.
All right. Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to return to some of what my colleague, Ms. Capter, was talking about regarding biofuels research and ask you to point to some specific outcomes. And then I do have a concern of trying to get an understanding of what research is going on across multiple disciplines. For instance, when I was on the Agricultural Committee, we had asked for a summary of all of the research going on across the government into renewable biofuels. And we don't think we ever got it, because it looked like to be a pretty complicated piece of information to try to obtain. So that suggests there might be some duplication going on. Is there a coordinated effort here with the Department of Agriculture? And then could you be specifics in terms of what we're looking at producing? I understand that the next generation of ethanol was to be cellulosic, and there is some advancements being made internationally. My impression is we're lagging, though, here in the United States in that regard. And then regarding your microbial synthesis of fuels, does that mean algae?
No, it does not mean algae.
Okay, well, tell me what that means.
It means the bioenergy research centers in general do not work on algae. They work on other kinds of feedstocks. So it would be other feedstocks using microbes to generate alcohols directly. I don't know enough about this to be as informed as I am on some other subjects.
Well, I think that's part of my question, and neither do I. And I'd like to know what the government is doing everywhere, not just right here in this regard, to ensure that we're coordinating properly, that we've not unproductively stovepiped this between you, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, all of whom have interest in this.
Well, I know that there are coordinating committees, federal coordinating committees that do look at this. I also know that the former director of biological and environmental research, she retired not very long ago, came from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so she reached out very often to USDA to form collaborations. In general, in the Department of Energy, in the Office of Science, we have a good understanding of what our counterparts are doing, whether it be USDA, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, or the DoD agencies. We have a good understanding, and I've not seen an example where partnering doesn't happen when it ought to happen. I'm happy to get you the information on biofuels across the government to give you a sense of where the Department of Energy fits and where other agencies fit.
Well, that would be helpful because to not only understand who is doing what and then who is making the decision about who's going to collaborate with whom. That would also be helpful. And I think that way we ensure that the proper specialization is supported, and we are clearly always looking for areas in which we can consolidate or make things more effective and efficient. But in terms of the outcomes, is my statement correct that we are lagging in cellulosic, the next generation of cellulosic production, whereas there are some other countries who have integrated this more successfully into commercial outcomes?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get you the answer.
Yeah. It's my understanding that China, maybe, and I'm going off memory here, but Brazil, I think, has made some advances as well.
Okay, again, I don't know. Brazil, of course, is very heavily into sugar.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last thing I want to touch on with you is that Congress funded the first 3 energy innovation hubs in fiscal year 2010. Committee funded a limited number of these hubs because of the potential to deliver more per taxpayer dollar, but we also funded them with the understanding that the progress must be tracked closely and that only hubs demonstrating exceptional results should be extended beyond their initial 5 years. One of the 3 hubs, the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis at Caltech and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, is under your purview. In layman's terms, this hub aims to create a device that creates transportation fuels from sunlight. The budget request includes funding to renew the hub for another 5-year term. How has this hub performed so far, and will you look to recompete it or simply renew it? And can we expect, no, I won't ask that part. While hubs are originally pitched by the Secretary of Energy as initiatives under one roof, this hub is actually under 2 roofs, Caltech and Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. Is that model proving effective, and what are its challenges? And what have you learned from the hub model of this experience?
This particular hub has produced to date some very interesting results, one of which was the development of very high throughput screening for parts of what would become the artificial photosynthetic device. It has done it has developed apparatus for screening tens of thousands of catalysts, for photoabsorbers, and so forth, quickly and rapidly. And that is a big step in creating a device. And they have also done some very excellent work at the beginnings of trying to assemble components into a device. This hub, as probably you are aware, had some management challenges in the middle of its life. The Basic Energy Sciences program, which runs the hub, which oversees the hub, is going in for the final annual review of the hub in April of this year. Based on that review, guidance will be provided to the hub director, and that guidance can span a wide array. I can tell you that the likelihood of recompetition is extremely small, because starting a new hub in the same area, we would have to go through the same growing pains. I mentioned earlier the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board review of hubs, Energy Frontier Research Centers, Bioenergy Research Centers, and ARPA-E. That report is in draft on the CEB website. It just came out this weekend. One of the comments that it makes about hubs is that when the renewal time comes, the options should be, for example, I may not get this totally correct, termination, full funding, or something in between.
That
And
leaves it pretty wide open.
But recompetition is not one of the options. Recompetition is not one of the options. It can, the hub owner can also put out less funding, as we've seen with the hub, the buildings hub, and dehubify it. But recompetition is not an option. So based on this review that will happen in April, the program will provide direction to the hub for its renewal proposal. And we have requested full funding for the hub, but that is a placeholder. Once we know what direction we have given to the hub management, we will inform this committee.
So, if those are the options, full funding or defunding, dehubifying, whatever you want to call it, or anything in between,
Anything in between?
does that suggest what do you do if you have a subject matter that is potentially very, very valuable, like this Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis? Let's assume that that's a subject that we ought to be investing in and so forth, but the hub just does a damn poor job. So you want to defund it. You still got the subject that you think is important. You don't recompete it. You just say we picked the wrong subject. I don't know that I'm explaining it.
No, I do understand what you're saying. I don't think that will be the outcome, first, knowing a lot about this particular hub. There may be areas within the hub that are extremely high functioning and ought to continue. The entire hub ought to continue. But you have to, one thing that's important to understand is that this hub is built on an incredibly large research portfolio that the Basic Energy Sciences program funds in artificial photosynthesis, essentially in all of the small components of artificial photosynthesis, light absorbers, catalysts, so forth. And this is completely hypothetical and has nothing whatsoever to do with how this hub will review.
And my question was hypothetical too, so.
But for example, let's say there were a hub-like entity, and we discovered after 5 years, after the 5-year review, that there were parts of it that were so important and had made such great progress that we had to continue those. We could probably continue it within the existing hub, or we could have some kind of other activity, a set of small Energy Frontier Research Centers that work on pieces of it. So I think that what the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board was saying is, keep your options open, Not everything needs to be a hub. Don't start over trying to build up all the same infrastructure all over again after 5 years. And consider how this particular funding mechanism might work as we go into the future.
On the batteries and energy storage hub is also in the Office of Science,
Right.
but was funded in fiscal year 2012 and awarded at the Argonne National Laboratory. This battery hub also involves 4 other national labs, 5 universities, and 4 companies. While the strong interest is encouraging, this does leave us wondering whether the involvement of 14 entities will spread funds thin and create a hub under 14 roofs. And is this what we were originally talking about when we were talking about hubs, trying to bring things together under one roof for a single subject, sort of?
Yeah, some of the 14 are very small partners. I think looking at the experience of the Energy Frontier Research Centers, honestly, I had thought that they're small, they're $2 to $5 million. I thought that they would be largely under one roof entities, and it turned out that they're not. And they work extremely well. The challenge when you have multiple entities is management. The management has to very strictly and very sternly use the partners in a way that you get an outcome in the requisite period of time. The hub itself, or the Energy Frontier Research Center itself, cannot be a funding agency that doles out money to 14 partners. It has to be a strongly organized, centrally managed entity that pulls basic research in from its partners in order to produce a product.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ketcher?
Yes. I'm going to switch to a totally different plane here for a second. When we were out at Berkeley Livermore, Congresswoman Barbara Lee of Oakland joined us for some of those meetings. And we were very enthralled with all of the work being done on the expanding universe there, and the laser research nearby, and left viewing the property on which a $100 million solar research facility would be built. And but one of the topics that we discussed was the growing social and economic bifurcation in our own society. And those that have meager options, and the pull that is occurring within this country right now in many, many communities. And we began to engage in a discussion about how the Department of Energy and its vast research resources might serve as an integrator of capabilities that could help improve life in some of the most forgotten corners of this country. And we wrote a letter to the Department of Energy and to Livermore, and we got a very good answer back. And then a few weeks, and this letter came from the Congresswoman and myself, but we have a bit of a coalition going here in the House, including Congresswoman Fudge of Cleveland, Congressman Fatah, who was here this morning from Philadelphia, and Congresswoman Moore of Milwaukee. We are finding we share some similar challenges, including many places where there are nutrition-short communities in this abundant society, and where many individuals live right at the edge. And so we started thinking about how we could restore, on the nutrition front, the ability to grow and raise product, and to create a growing system that would be the most energy and water efficient that exists anywhere in the world. And you could almost roll it into any neighborhood, attach it to any church, put it up on a lot, and you would think the Department of Agriculture would be doing this, but I guarantee you they're not. And even thinking about advanced systems that are very cost effective, but for example, where the covering, whatever that might be a thin multi-layer creation that would have energy capabilities, and where the source of water would be well timed, and you would literally have an easy production platform. So the reason that I'm asking this question is when we went to Argonne a few weeks later, it was so interesting because I don't think the people at Berkeley told them what we were interested in, but they presented us with this brochure about revitalizing urban America, having a role in the redevelopment of urban communities. It was interesting to go through that. So Argonne's involved, making an effort in the Chicago area. And my question to you really is there a way for you to take a look at the letter that we wrote to Berkeley, what Argonne is doing, and develop a dialogue with the department to find a way to pinpoint some of these smaller efforts in these communities that we're talking about, and to develop a concept that would really be breakthrough that we could use in this country and frankly globally. And that's really, I think, something that I would like the Office of Science to consider. If a couple of your labs are already doing some things out there, Mr. Fatah talked about weatherization and some of the new energy efficient technologies that can be integrated into our urban communities and some of our rural communities that are living at the raw edge. I wanted to mention that to you because I think we want to grow. We want to grow this effort, and we want to see what the Department of Energy and its incredible scientists could offer to meet the other half of America that is not able to travel to Berkeley or to Argonne and to see what I saw. And would very much appreciate your attention to the letter that we sent and some of the materials we're gathering now from the department. Perhaps you could find a way to help us integrate.
I'm happy to do that. I know that Argonne National Laboratory is working with the City of Chicago and the University of Chicago to reach out and look at some of these issues. I'm happy to look at that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That's my last question for the record here.
Well, if there's no other questions, I thank you, Doctor, for being here today. We look forward to working with you on these fascinating projects that, frankly, I don't understand, but I do like to listen to them. So thanks for all you do, and we look forward to working with you. I'm sure that there will be some questions that will be submitted if you can return within 4 weeks, because we're going to start trying to mark up our bill relatively early. So your input would be very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you very much.